I want to focus today on retirement planning. And the reason I want to do that is because I feel like retirement planning is traditionally built somewhat on a threat. And that threat for many is the threat of running out of money. So what we use in a lot of cases in our profession is what we call success rates, where we say you have a 75% success rate where your plan worked out. Well, when you see that number, it kind of feels like I've got a 1 in 4 chance then of going broke. And then I also find in practice when I show folks a 92% success rate, they're also asking, well, what about the other 8%? That seems a lot more morbid than I prefer. So even if the probability like that is excellent, the emotional impact to the whole thing is no good. And so I think those success plans and those percentages are very helpful. But I feel like adding what we call guardrails to the overall thing helps flip the psychology a little bit. So instead of worrying about what can go wrong, retirees know exactly what they're going to do, even if the markets move up or if they move down. So really the message then becomes you're safe as long as you stay within these spending ranges. And if the markets drop, we'll adjust. No panic required. So what that helps us do is feel a permission to spend, a confidence in retirement that you can live the dreams, the plans that you've saved and worked so hard for with a lot of confidence that I know if things change, I may have to make slight adjustments, but I've got a parameter to work within. And that's what we really want to demonstrate for you here today. So, all right, I'm going to kick this off over here. Great. So what we're looking at is building these guardrails and these this retirement paycheck, which is a big mental shift for a lot of folks because what you're doing is going from a workforce where you got to check every couple of weeks to now where your portfolio, your assets, the things that you've saved and worked on are going to begin taking care of that for you. So it can be definitely a mental shift and it can be kind of a tough one. All right, so who am I? Why am I here talking about this with you? Well, I'm Matt Moline. I'm a certified financial planner. I'm the founder and CEO of Prairie Fire Wealth Planning in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm also the author of Empty Nest Full Pockets, which is a book that talks about kind of the emotional and financial journey of becoming an empty nester and then thinking about your own retirement, your own future after you've been raising your kids full time. We've helped hundreds of families transition from full-time parents to empty nesters to full-time retirees with confidence. And to date, knock on wood, none of my clients have had to dramatically change their retirement plans. And in most cases, I'm telling them they can spend more. In some cases, I'm begging them to spend more because they just don't do it. But one of the things I want to let you know is that everybody on this webinar is going to have a chance to set up a complimentary guardrail plan of their own. So if you're interested in learning more about how that goes, we're setting up what we call 20-minute retirement tax map calls. What we're going to discuss in this call is how we would handle Social Security and making the most of Social Security, how we can minimize taxes throughout retirement by where we put assets, where the growth assets are, where we're going to be spending money down from first, and all of those kind of things. So I'll knock up here this offer, and all we're asking everyone to do is to schedule the call, and the link to do that will be right in there. So I'll be bringing this back up here in a few minutes as well. But if it's something that you're interested in, you can reach out and let us know. All right, so really what we want to do today is help solve this problem. And for many folks, the way that problem feels is it's really anxiety, even though we have assets. And the anxiety in many cases can be greater than the assets that we hold. And so many families have a real goal. They want a reliable paycheck that they can trust. So not necessarily looking for the greatest returns, not looking to speculate big in crypto and all the different things that are going on in the markets, but really looking for reliability. I want a paycheck that I can believe in and know that it's going to be there even if things change in the world, which the world is always changing. So hopefully by the end of this today, what you're going to find out is how we can determine your spending range, when you would need to make an adjustment, and then what that withdrawal order looks like. And so from there, we can get a feel for what's going to come up next, when we need to make adjustments, and all of that sort of thing. All right, I'm going to switch here and turn this off. So I read this book recently called Die With Zero, and I found it very interesting. It was written by a guy named Bill Perkins, and definitely somebody who's lived his experience. He has a a very interesting philosophy on life. And if you remember many, many years ago, there was a book called Die Broke, and it talked about how you should work hard to basically spend your money down to nothing, which for a lot of folks is very difficult to think about because we've built up these assets and then we get into retirement and you begin to see them diminishing. And that can be discouraging. It can feel like I'm doing something wrong. Is the plan actually going to work if we have things that we didn't expect, long-term care needs, or we have a correction in the market that brings the values down significantly? One of our kids gets sick, one of our parents gets sick, and we're having to help them out. This life changes. And so the thought of dying with zero, for one, is very, very difficult to do. We definitely, to nail that to zero would be virtually impossible and probably not something I would recommend. But I did think the framework that he discussed was interesting. And so I included a quote from the book in here, and it says, although we all have at least the potential to make more money in the future, we can never go back and recapture time that is now gone. So it makes no sense to let opportunities pass us by for fear of squandering our money. Squandering our lives should be a much greater worry. And, this really got me thinking that, we're doing a lot for our clients and helping them save, get ready for this, but we also need to be asking the questions of what are we doing with these funds? How can we live in a way that we're not worried all the time that we're going to run out of money so that we can live our lives and not have to squander those lives? So what I'm going to show you today is a program that we use that helps us define these guardrails and helps us take some of the guesswork out of retirement planning. And so there's a reason that these work. And the reason is there's kind of pre-decided rules that can help us reduce panic and overspending. We're going to take a look at balance sheets, at cash flows, income sources, and while all that can seem overwhelming, it actually isn't. It's basic snapshots of where everything is now. And then with that information, we can really help define those guardrails and review the metrics for when a guardrail needs to change. So without further ado, let us kick into it. All right, I'm going to switch my camera here. We are taking a look at Mike and Sarah. So Mike and Sarah, as you can see, we have built out their assets, their liabilities, their income, and their expenses. So Mike is 60, Sarah's 58. Sarah wants to retire in the near term here in 2027, and Mike's going to work a few years longer than that. So they're looking at full retirement for both somewhere around 2029, just to give you a framework of this. So for assets, they've got about $1.9 million in their investment accounts. They've got a joint taxable account. They've got $500,000 in Mike's IRA, and then $600,000 into Sarah's 401k. They've got some banking assets, and then they've also got a house that they live on at 123 Main Street. Must be Valley Junction. Anyway, these folks are fictional. This is just a sample, but I wanted to give you a feel for how this works and how we determine what these guardrails look like. All right, liabilities, they've got about $220,000 inside of a mortgage on their property. And then their income right now is made up of mostly both of them still working. So Mike is working, as is Sarah, and they also have a rental property where they're deriving about $18,000 in income from. And so right now income is leveling off at about $342,000 right now before they retire. Their expenses are essentially $120,000 just in baseline living expenses. When we meet with a new group or we're talking with somebody, we kind of get a feel for what they think the budget might be. And this can be a somewhat difficult exercise to figure out how much is actually going out each month and also determining how much of that is necessary and the actual, needed living expenses and the rest then for recreation. We want to build in a budget for both. Definitely want to have room for not just the basics of paying our utilities and our taxes, but where we can do for trips, cars, helping out our family, whatever the case may be for you. So for this case, for them, we built baseline expenses of $10,000 a month, and then some other variable expenses like their mortgage payment, term insurance. And you can see we have like a line item for vacations in here if we wanted. So we are looking at how we can live and not squander our lives, as we talked about there earlier. Everything then is we include all these different taxes, of course. They're paying a fair amount of taxes now because they're still working, and that tax liability will shift once it becomes their assets that they're living on instead of their income. We also look into what they have saved. And right now they're doing some savings into IRAs. Sarah's doing some into her 401k. And then they also have some planned savings going into a taxable account just for the two of them. So they're saving about $24,000 a year off of what they're working on right now. All right. So what we're going to do from there is take a look at how we can determine what their guardrails look like. And so what this is going to do is take their assets today, project them forward into May of 2027 when Sarah retires. And we're showing that it's going to be about 2.1 million at that time. So based on that number, we're saying that they could probably project their income to be around $14,600. So if we gross that up, it's closer to $16,694, and then we're estimating taxes if they stay in that same bracket at about 32%. So net income for them is going to be right around $11,300 that they can live on. So if you remember, we set up their plan at around 11.3 is what we're showing proposed, and then their essential expenses, if you remember, were about $10,000, and what they're hoping to live on is closer to $12,500. So we're somewhere right in the middle for them right now. And there's a lot of ways we can adjust that based on how much they save, how much longer they work, if they can live on less, perhaps, whatever the case may be. But we're going to build a good budget for them that shows what they can do and how they can make the most of these different expenses. Then we also break down where that's all going to come from. You know, Mike's salary will be the case for the next few years. They also have the rental property, the pension income, and then a little bit from their taxable accounts, et cetera. So what this allows us to do is to begin the whole guardrail process. So for these folks, what we've done is build a guardrail that says if the portfolio assets, for whatever reason, go up to 2.3 million from where they are today, that would be about a 10% increase. Well, shoot, we've seen that kind of increase just this year in the market and the last couple of years. But we also remember 2022, where we had declines come along. But in this case, if we saw a 10% increase where all of a sudden their assets did better than we expected, they're at 2.3 million. You can see we moved them from the 14,600 budgeted number up to 16,000. This we call their upper guardrail. And so when we meet, we can say, based on how things have gone, we're showing that you can spend more if you wanted to. So remember with Mike and Sarah here, they were thinking maybe they would want to spend a little bit more, especially early on in retirement. And I do see this a lot in practice. When you retire, whether it's in your 60s, late 50s, mid to late 60s, whatever the case may be, that's when you really want to go sprinting towards the fun, for lack of a better word. You want to really be enjoying your time. You want to be doing the things that you may not be able to do later with health issues and all that fun stuff that we all have to look forward to. And so those early years, if you can spend a little bit more and you're fortunate to be in a position where you know what your upper guardrail is, it's a great time to do it. On the other side of this, then, what we also have is a lower guardrail, where we'd have to potentially decrease their income. And so in this case, we're looking at what would require about a 28% market decline before we'd be coming in with the recommendation that they reduce their spending. And even then, we're only requesting that their savings go down or their spending go down by about 5%. So you can see then we've got these nice guardrails set up to know exactly where Mike and Sarah are at, what they can do in good times, and how much they can weather on the downside before they need to adjust their lifestyle in any way, shape, or form. I find this to be very helpful mentally to say, all right, I know the markets are down. I know I've lost, let's call it 10% in this most recent correction. So if you're all invested on this call right now, if you were invested in April, you saw that kind of decline when the tariff issue hit the markets. We saw big 1,000-point plus declines in the Dow. I don't know what the total correction amounted to, depending on what you were invested in, but it definitely felt like at least a 10% correction. These happen all the time. There's 70 to 80 of them over the last 70 years. They're very, very common. And that's just the market's way of clearing things out, getting itself to a healthy value and marching on from there in most cases. So these 10% corrections, when they happen, as you can see, in most cases, you do not need to adjust your lifestyle based on those. For one, they tend to be pretty short-lived. And two, they will find a bottom at some point. Now, of course, there are drastic measures, drastic times when the markets go down significantly. And as you can see, we would need to make slight adjustments there, but by no means dramatic, no means having to go back to work, make those kind of changes, but more decrease in income slightly, live on a little bit less, maybe we postpone a trip, whatever the case may be. But this is your permission to spend plan. This says we've got what we need to live and spend in this current guardrail format, and we can make that work. So some clients will come to me and say, there's no way I'm going to spend anywhere near $14,000 a month. Bring that down. So I can take that down over here to say $13,900 instead. Well, as you can see, the upper guardrail becomes a lot closer. We only need about a 5% increase before we can say, hey, you can spend more if you want to. And then also a much bigger decline of 33% versus 28 before they hit that lower edge. We can also go to the opposite direction. We're going to spend more. So does that put us in trouble? Well, not unless we see a 25% decline in the market in this case, but you can go up to that $15,000 a month number to spend for Mike and Sarah. Anyway, interesting stuff, lots of levers to pull here. But the message I want to send you is that you can develop a very good guardrail plan that can help you smooth out through retirement and not have to worry about the intermittent things quite as much, and then develop your plans for the things that you really want to do, the things that you really want to spend your money on. And like we talked about earlier, not squandering life wherever we can help it. All right, I'm going to take a quick swig break here. One of the other neat things that we can do then with this is take a look at how taxes are going to work. And so the common philosophy when it comes to taxes is that we're always going to take out assets that have already been taxed first when we're doing our retirement income. And then from there, we might take tax deferred. We might take Roth monies if we happen to have those. So your taxable accounts are those that you've saved in that are usually in you and your spouse's name, your trust, whatever that case may be. And you're paying taxes as you go with those. So if you have a capital gain, you buy and sell Apple, and you make money on that, you'll pay capital gains tax on that money. So those are what we call taxable dollars. And they're usually easier to withdraw because we can control those taxes, say when we want to take capital gains or not, when we want to do something different. Tax-free then is generally your Roth, IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversion monies that you've used. And what these can tell you then is that money is growing and they're tax-free. What those dollars tend to do to give you, in my experience, is a lot of flexibility to use for healthcare, to use for unexpected things, a trip, whatever, where you don't necessarily want to pay any more taxes in a given year. You've got some Roth money that you can access after 59 and a half, and boom, that can allow a lot more flexibility in the plan. And then tax deferred, think of your 401ks and your IRAs. You're getting a tax deferral in those dollars while you hold them up until you have to take them out or you choose to take them out after you retire. When those come out, they're taxed as ordinary income. It's the worst tax treatment you can get. And it's going to be based on your tax bracket as to how much you're going to pay there. And so what we can do in this program is sort these a little bit to say, well, what if I did it in a different order? I took my tax deferred assets first. So I'm going to invade my IRAs versus my taxable accounts. And it does save a little bit just because you're defraying what that liability could become later when you're forced to take that money out. But where we're really seeing some dramatic changes is if we look at something like Roth conversions. So in Mike and Sarah's plan, if they were to bite the bullet and do a Roth conversion, and the way a Roth conversion works is you take your tax-deferred IRA 401k dollars, you distribute them. When you do that, you pay taxes then at your current rate, whatever your current bracket is. That money has then been taxed and can be converted over to a Roth IRA. And then from that day forward, it will grow inside that Roth IRA without any taxes. So all that growth is tax-free. And it's also not going to be subject to where you have to take the money out in your 70s like you will with your tax-deferred dollars. So if we take a look at Mike and Sarah's situation, if when they're both retired, so while they're still working, this isn't probably something that we'd look to pursue aggressively, but when they're done working and their tax bracket comes down because they're not earning income any longer from their employer, it does give them a chance to actually reduce their overall tax rate through retirement. So this is, remember, projecting out until their late 80s, early 90s for lifespan. So we have a lot of time to make back some of these taxes that they've paid early on. But if something was to happen to them early in life, if they were predeceased before they expected, this wouldn't work. But that's, of course, an unknown. We don't know when that's going to happen. So as far as planning goes, this is where, in some cases, we'll recommend, let's take a look at this because it could make some sense if you have longevity in your family, if you're going to have a huge, large tax-deferred bucket that's going to have to be taxed at some point, maybe paying a little bit of that early on so that you have a little bit more flexibility later on, that kind of thing. So in this case, if they were to convert up to the 22% bracket, and I'll explain that here in a second, it would save them about 4% on their average tax rate. total taxes over their lifetime, almost 675,000, and their total net income goes up then, of course, about the same amount. And they're also increasing their legacy goal. They have more to pass on to their family. So the way this would look is that while they're still working, we're not really making any changes. They're paying the same amount of taxes they normally were. It's in these years where the blue bars are higher that they're beginning to convert those dollars to Roth IRAs from their IRAs. So they're paying, these blue bars are the taxes that they're paying in those years. So a few things. You can't do this. You can do it, but you shouldn't do it if you don't have money set aside to pay these taxes. You don't want to pull extra money out of the IRAs to pay the taxes. It kind of defrays the whole purpose of this. So it only works if we have taxable monies kind of set aside to help pay these taxes along the way. But if they do, or if they sell their rental property, or we decide to do something different with their residence, whatever the case may be, where we've got some extra cash setting aside, we could convert some of these dollars. And then what really happens is the magic is later, when all of a sudden they are paying very, very light amounts of taxes, or if they hadn't done these conversions, you can see what's going to happen to their tax bill as they age into their 80s and 90s. It's going to get really large, and it's forced upon you because of what are called the required minimum distributions. So for anyone on this call, it could be anywhere from age 73 to 75 that you're going to be forced to begin taking money out of your tax deferred plans. The folks in Washington, they loved to give you this beautiful tax deferral, and then they want to get paid. And so come your 70s, that's what happens. And so as you can see, they took this tax burden on early on. Mike and Sarah could have chosen to do that, and then their total taxes were quite a bit lower. You can kind of see from this table here, where paid a lot of taxes early on out of retirement. And then when they got into retirement in their mid 70s, their tax bills were very, very low. Over here, if everything stays in the tax deferred bucket, you can see, boy, those taxes really go up as they get older. And I can just tell you, speaking from practical experience, we have a lot of folks that are getting required distributions that don't need the money, having to pay taxes on it. It's not a great feeling. And in some cases, it can become a real burden later in life. So just something to think about there is you're also working on your own tax plan, your own retirement plan. You want to be thinking about your kind of your tax order and where that money is going to come out from. And part of our retirement tax map call can help you figure this out. Okay, I'm going to shift gears from this. So what we've done here is we have set up our guardrail plan. We've determined what we're going to need, which is a basic balance sheet, our cash flows, and then we're going to define those guardrails. So this is what we can do on your behalf if and when you're interested. All right. We also determine the flow. Where is the money going to come from? What bucket are we going to pull that money from? And what makes the most sense? We also then assess everybody's buckets of money. And so what we're always looking at is your safety bucket, your midterm lifestyle bucket, and your long-term aspirational bucket. And what those are designed to do is to make sure we've got the assets invested in the right place based on that bucket. Is there a possibility that we're going to have a lot of taxes inside the taxable bucket that we can do something different with? And then that aspirational long-term bucket, we also want to make sure that we got our growth assets, our stocks, the ones that we really want to grow over time inside of those buckets. So part of this overall process is making sure that we have that bucket methodology figured out. Right. So we talked a little bit already about taxes in your new paycheck. So the thing that you need to think about is that when you start pulling your money out of your accounts, especially if you have lots of it in what we'll call kind of those tax deferred dollars. So for most people, their flow is that they're doing their taxable first, like I mentioned, and preserving their Roth. There's plenty of exceptions to that, but that's generally what we're looking at. So one of the things when you're assessing your buckets is that we want to make sure we've got everything located in the right place, and understanding that when you begin taking your new paycheck, you need to have kind of an after-tax mindset. So even though you may say, like in Mike and Sarah's case, where we saw they had $16,000 they're taking out, 32% of that was going to get taxed based on the early years. And so that $16,000 quickly becomes $11,000. So even though we're talking about permission to spend, we want to make sure we have our eye on, we may have a big chunk of assets in these retirement accounts and feeling like we can spend quite a bit because of them, but I just want you to make sure you're considering how that after tax is going to work. And then the other thing that goes into all this is Social Security. And one of the things that really need to focus on when you're getting to that age, up to 62 through 70, you basically have 8 years to be thinking about, and before then, what am I going to do with Social Security? And I see a lot of errors made when it comes to this, either claiming too early, not coordinating with what a spousal benefit is going to look like, what your full retirement age means, and how that actually impacts when you take your Social Security, and also the impact that's going to be on your portfolio if you decide to wait and take your Social Security late. So all the pundits, all the reports are always going to show wait till 70. You'll get the most benefit, but you don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know how much that's going to damage your portfolio or require a lot to be withdrawn from your portfolio before you get to that age. It's a very specific, very, very specific decision to your family. And so when you're getting close to that Social Security age and thinking about your new paycheck, maximizing Social Security is something to really be thinking about. It's way beyond the scope of today's webinar, but we will be talking about it more and more in the future if you want to stay tuned. All right. The other thing that we need to be thinking about is what I call bringing a prairie fire mindset to your permission to spend retirement. What I mean by that, the prairie fire metaphor is basically a prairie fire is set to burn away the old crap that's blocking the sun, allowing water in or any nutrition. And so that fire is set to those weeds. They're burned away. It looks ugly for a while. It's got a charred look to it. And then over time, all the new growth can come up. They get new water, new nutrients in there. We try to bring that mindset to when it comes to retirement planning, to say this is a new stage of life. There's a lot of assumptions and belief that this is the way it has to go, that you have to be a miser and you can't spend while you're in retirement. You've got to live a certain way of lifestyle, just hunkered down in a house. And we just don't believe that's the case. We believe that permission to spend mentality has to take place in there. So what we really see then is to be thinking about, know your range, find out your range, understand what it looks like for you, set the rules for how you're going to retire, the things that you want to do and accomplish, and how you can get your plan to work that. Choose your withdrawal order. Make sure that you've got your assets figured out which ones you want to pull out first. Review this on a very regular basis, at least annually. So if you want help, that's where we're here for, to help with your situation. And I'll just briefly explain how the 20-minute call works. It's really for empty nesters that are within the 5 years or so of retirement or newly retired. You've got some money saved. I'm going to pop the offer back up here 1 second. You've got some money saved, but you're not quite sure what you want to do as far as what your guardrails would look like, what that range is for you. And so what we'll do is just outline a first draft withdrawal order for the next 12 months. We will flag any tax bracket issues that we think you'll need to watch. And then you'll also leave with a one-page summary. No pressure to hire us, just how it would work to work with us and how to get this thing going. And we think it's very valuable. It's low pressure. I've only got slots to do 2 or 3 of these through the end of the year. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to sign up. And we very, very much thank you all for being here today. I'm going to